and welcome to our conversation on the role of botanical gardens in advancing climate resilience, hosted here at COP30 by the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the New York Botanical Garden. My name is Emma Grover, and I am the project manager of the Nurturing Nature Initiative at the New York Botanical Garden. And I'm really excited and honored to be moderating this panel today at a really important time at COP30 in the heart of the Amazonian city of Belém, where we are really lucky to be discussing and meeting about some of the most important and pressing issues in the environmental world today. And some of the things we'll be talking about in this conversation are how botanical gardens are positioning themselves to really enhance plant-based solutions and serve as anchors for biodiversity-driven pathways for a more green and resilient future. And I'm really lucky to be joined by two incredible leaders in this space, Dr. Eric Sanderson, who is the Vice President of Urban Conservation at the New York Botanical Garden, as well as Dr. Alex Antonelli, who is the Executive Director of Science at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. So I think it's best if we start off with a few short introductions, and I'd love, Eric, if you could start us off with introducing us to yourself, your role, and how it ties into botanical gardens and resilience.
Sure. So I'm Eric Sanderson. I'm the director of the Center for Conservation and Restoration Ecology at the New York Botanical Garden, and we're so excited to be here at COP. It's the first time NYBG's ever been at a COP. And the reason we're here is because botanical gardens are so important for the future of the climate and for biodiversity. I mean, what is a botanical garden after all? It's a place where people know about plants. At NYBG, we like to say we're purposeful plant people. And so a botanical garden is a place where the living collections, the plants, are labeled and understood, where we have a herbarium and a library, and then a science division that's doing research about how plants contribute to the well-being of all of us. So, plants are very important for biodiversity. They're the root of all life, of the life cycle of everything, but they're also hugely important for the climate, through shading for cities and for people, through keeping cooler, and for managing the water cycle. Something like 60% of the water cycle moves from the groundwater through the plants and back up into the sky. And so we really can't address climate on a global scale, and particularly here in the Amazon, without thinking about plants. And so it's such a pleasure to be here with Alex from one of the most amazing botanical gardens in the world.
Likewise, I'm really delighted to be here. I think that botanic gardens, for many people, might be a great place to go take your family to. But of course, botanic gardens can do so much more for our planet. But they have been around for hundreds of years, and they are our primary reference, I think, for all knowledge about plants. So I've been involved with botanic gardens for at least 20 years. I'm a biodiversity scientist, I'm a professor of biodiversity, but I'm very passionate about the interlinkage between the living collections, the collections we have in our herbarium, for instance, and what we can do to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss.
Thank you both. And with that, I think we should dive into our discussion here. And I'll start with you, Eric, knowing this is NYBG's first climate COP. And I'd love if you could speak a little bit more about the unique ways that botanical gardens are currently engaging in climate resilience efforts and some of the unique capacities that they hold to help enhance these efforts.
Yeah, I think one of the things botanical gardens can really help with is ecosystem restoration on a global scale. I think we all know how much we need to be restoring the ecosystems of the planet, and we need to be scaling up those efforts much more quickly in order to address the climate crisis. And so one of the things botanical gardens know about is plants. What plants to plant in an ecosystem restoration, what's native, what's not native, how to propagate plants. You can think of botanical gardens as this sort of merger of the expertise that comes out of botany and the expertise that comes out of horticulture. What are the plants, why are they important, and how do you grow them, and how do you plant them, and how do you take care of them? And so I think botanical gardens have a huge opportunity to engage in ecological restoration on a global scale.
Yes, thank you so much. And Alex, piggybacking off of that, I'm curious from your perspective and the work being done at Kew, how do botanical gardens lead on and complement global restoration efforts and other plant-based solutions and help to translate biodiversity science into action on the ground?
Yeah, so I think as Eric's saying, restoration is a major challenge, and that's why the United Nations declared this decade as the decade on ecosystem restoration. But the problem is that we don't quite know how to do it, and I think the science of restoration is, in my opinion, a few light years beyond behind conservation science. I think the projects that we're doing for CEQ, we have more than 600 scientists working in more than 100 countries, and we do have partnerships with organizations such as Missouri Botanical Gardens in Madagascar, trying to restore some of the most important ecosystems for people, livelihoods, but also biodiversity. We're working with agroforestry in Mexico, and the project that I'm particularly involved in is in my home country. I'm Brazilian. I grew up near the Atlantic forest of Brazil, which is one of the primary places for ecosystem restoration on the planet. So the Atlantic forest, not many people know about it, but it's this major rainforest which used to cover the entire eastern part of Brazil, but now it's been reduced to less than 8%. So we are now working with scientists at CEQ and our partners in Brazil on the ground to see, what kind of species should be coming back to those ecosystems, how to source the seeds, because seed supply is one of the major challenges for many restoration projects. We also need to understand what's the likely climatic impact on those species. So I think that by combining that kind of evidence-based evidence on collections, but also the models that our scientists can use, we can really make restoration more effective and also long-term. So I'm very excited about that connection, and I think that there are huge opportunities ahead.
Yeah. Can I also say
Sure.
that many botanical gardens are in cities, and plants in cities are very important for urban adaptation to climate change. So both helping move water back into the sky, but also shading people to deal with the heat island effect in cities. And because botanical gardens in cities and 57% of people all around the world live in cities, it's a really important opportunity to educate people about why plants are important and why biodiversity in cities is so important.
Thank you both. And with that, I think it is important as we lead into conversations around solutions to talk about some of the key barriers to these solutions, so we can illuminate pathways to get to positive outcomes and impacts for our planet. So Alex, I'll turn back to you and ask, what are some of the most pressing constraints facing plant-based solutions today, and how can botanical gardens help to address these barriers to success?
Yeah, so I think, of course, one of the most pressing challenges we have is in terms of funding. And the Global Biodiversity Framework has set some very ambitious targets for protection and restoration of ecosystems, but we also know that there is a huge funding gap of about $700 billion every year to close that gap. So that's one of the key aspects. But even when there is funding, we have to make sure that we do as good a job as we can. And that's where I think Botanical Gardens can really play a role, because we are experts. There are not many other places where there's so much knowledge about ecosystems, about what grows where. And based on the collections from our herbaria, millions of specimens where we know exactly what different ecosystems consist of, and make sure that when we do get the funding, we apply that effectively. And that's why, I think that, nature-based solutions when it comes to climate change are really about harnessing the power of nature. Of course, we need technological advance as well, but I think in meetings like this, it's very important to really pinpoint the crucial role that nature can play in terms of tackling climate change, and finding those synergies is really the way forward, I think.
Thank you. And Eric, turning to you now, I'm curious about your thoughts around how do we think about ways that we can connect in ex situ happening in botanical gardens through seed banks and living collections and research happening at the garden to ex situ large-scale landscape level restoration, and what are some of the things that we need to do to ensure the gaps are bridged?
Yeah. So that's a really important point, and I really appreciate Alex's point about the funding gap. It's so important to bring the kind of resources we need to the efforts to restore ecosystems on a global scale. So to your question, I think what herbariums and seed banks can do is they help us understand where biological diversity is, and help us understand where plants are. We also can do experiments in the botanical gardens, in our greenhouses, and on our grounds about how to grow plants for different ecosystems. A lot of botanical gardens actually are doing ecosystem restoration on their grounds themselves, and so those become important opportunities to learn about ecological restoration, what's possible, what's hard, what's not, and fill all those knowledge gaps that Alex was talking about.
Yes, thank you. Another thing that we've been talking about recently too is the knowledge that's held at gardens to help propagate and grow species and source these species. Another key barrier is finding plant stock supply. So thinking about ways that gardens can work to help provide materials to make these projects work as well. So thank you both for those answers. I'm curious now, leading into a kind of third question on thinking about how we collaborate and work to make these projects operate at scale. I'd want to focus on how we work across institutions and across regions globally. So Eric, could you share a little bit about the Nurturing Nature Initiative at the New York Botanical Garden, which is working to activate botanical gardens as catalysts for ecological restoration, and share a little bit about the vision for this network moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, at NYBG, we were very fortunate to get a small grant from the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation to work on ecological restoration and how can we organize botanical gardens around the world to make a contribution and scale up. So we have a team of advisors that have been advising us. We've been working with Botanical Gardens, Conservation International, and the Society for Ecological Restoration, and with botanical gardens like Kew and other gardens around the world to try and figure out what are the places, like what is the catalytic role that botanical gardens can play. One of the things we've been talking about is this area that you highlighted around seed sourcing. Because nobody knows about botanical biodiversity more than botanical gardens do, and we have this horticultural expertise. And so by doing projects, we can help local communities learn from what they know about their plants, help them get the materials they need, and maybe even create jobs and a new economic lifeline for rural communities around ecological restoration on a global scale.
Exactly. Thank you. And Alex, I'm curious your thoughts on this idea of how botanical gardens can slot into the restoration space and improve implementation. In your opinion, are there key things that come to mind on the ways that botanical gardens can really uniquely enhance these implementation efforts?
Absolutely, and I think that, the work that New York Botanical Garden is doing is really leading globally efforts such as bringing together organizations such as New York, Kew, Missouri, and other big players, but also the vital importance of working with local partnerships. Because, as you say, rightly, there's a huge amount of knowledge from local indigenous communities. Just as an example, some of my colleagues working in restoration in indigenous communities, they say that the difference are striking. For instance, when it comes to propagating and seed supply, there's one person who does each one of those steps, but indigenous communities usually they follow all the way through. You go and collect the seeds, you plant them, you seed grow, then you plant it on the soil, then you nurture it. So it's an attachment between humans and the ecosystems, which is really vital to make sure that those ecosystems will thrive and survive. And it's not all about how many species we plant and how many trees we plant, but also it's about their survival and the ecosystem functions that will come back. So I think there's much to be learned in terms of integrating scientific and traditional knowledge, and the key aspect here is about collaboration. So I'm very pleased with working with our colleagues at New York Botanical Garden, our organizations, because there's so much we can do together, and we can really harness again the power of nature to tackle those big challenges in climate change and biodiversity loss.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's not the plant's fault that the climate is changing. It's really the people's fault, right? The things we've done as a global society to change the climate. And that means that the solutions are probably also going to be in the social and economic sphere. And so cooperation is so important, which is the whole reason why we have these COPs, right? To bring people from all over the world to talk about how we can work together for climate change. And I'm just so pleased that botanical gardens are playing an important role. Kew has for a long time, and it's so great that the New York Botanical Garden's here for the first time to try and step up and fill this gap about what botanical gardens can do to catalyze ecological restoration.
Yes, I agree. And thank you both. I just want to kind of hone in on a couple points you made, Alex. The importance of local and traditional ecological knowledge is so key to these efforts, and there's so many opportunities for botanical gardens as really institutions found all over the globe, but centers also of community engagement and education and knowledge sharing to really work in collaboration with communities and learn from them as well, to make these really participatory efforts that build on what's happening on the ground already and knowledge already held by the communities where restoration is taking place. So I appreciate that point a lot. But I see that we're closing in on our time, and I wanted to thank you both for sharing all of these great points. It's really clear from this conversation to me that botanical gardens are both centers of beauty, but also really important centers for action in science in this important time where we're confronted by the interconnected crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. I think a lot of the points mentioned by Alex and Eric today really hone in on the fact that botanical gardens can bridge science, policy, and community engagement in ways that are really unique and can bring a lot of positive benefits to these efforts. So Thank you both for your time. If there's any additional points you'd like to add, the floor is yours, or I'm happy to close us out.
No, I mean, I think that just to summarize, I think Botanic Gardens have like at least 3 key areas of contribution here. One is just the sheer knowledge that exists in our organization, right? The second one is the collection, so the living specimens and the specimens in our dry collection, so the herbaria, where we can really derive a lot of the knowledge that is needed. And the third one is the role that we can play, as you mentioned, Eric, as living labs for restoration. So I think that by harnessing the combined potential, I think there's huge amounts to be gained.
Right, right. Plants are the source of life, so let's do everything we can to take care of them.
Thank you, and thank you to the CAP for hosting us.
Thank you.